Welcome to the Tabletop Empire. My name is Nate, and today I am joined by the RPG manager at Edge Studio, Samuel Gregor-Stewart. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, so we'll start with some easy questions for you. So for all the people who may not know who you are or what you do, tell us about yourself and what is your job as RPG manager?
Of course. So I, as the RPG manager at Edge Studio, I'm responsible for the development of new role-playing games and also new products for existing role-playing games, which is much more of what we do is development of existing lines. Yeah, so that's pretty much my day-to-day work. There's also a lot of paperwork and boring bureaucratic stuff that happens in the background. Yeah, that's my basic job. I've been doing this for it's been about 15 years now. Yeah, started back in 2008 at Fantasy Flight Games. After about a year, joined their RPG department. So I've gotten to work on Warhammer 40K, role playing in various forms. And when we got the license for Star Wars back in 2011, I got to be the lead developer alongside Jay Little, who was the lead designer for Edge of the Empire. Eventually, I got promoted to the head of the RPG department at FFG. And then when Edge took over the RPG business at Asmodee back in 2020, I was brought on as the head of the department at Edge.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, I know that we talked with Keith a little bit in our last interview, a little bit about the transition from Fantasy Flight over to Edge, and I'll have one question towards the end, of kind of getting more into that. But
Yes.
Another softball. Who's your favorite Star Wars character and why?
I just got to go with Hondo. Hondo Naka. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he's. I mean, you know, I hate to admit it, but the Mandalorian's actually up there. I've recently caught up with all of the seasons of the Mandalorian, and I'm sure it makes me incredibly basic to to use him as my answer, but
No, the
it's
Mandalorian's
true.
fun. It's a fun.
Yeah.
He's a fun character.
But Hondo's also just a brilliantly stereotyped character.
Oh yeah,
And yeah, so
I'd say
probably him overall.
Hondo's probably easily my most used cameo for Star Wars RPG.
Oh, he's
I
perfect that way.
he's so good.
Yeah.
So
I
even if
mean,
my accent's awful, my impersonation. But
I fell in love with the guy went through the Clone Wars series, as they would just keep throwing him in, sometimes as an enemy, sometimes as an ally, and yeah, I mean each time you're like, oh my god, Hondo's in this one.
yeah, and he immediately makes every episode better that he's in.
Mhm.
So when did you start playing tabletop role-playing games, and what system was your intro into the game genre?
So I kind of got started late in life, and by that I mean college. I was familiar with RPGs before that, but I didn't really play them. And my first experience with role playing games was actually through video games, through Neverwinter Nights was the big one. So, not surprisingly, I cut my teeth on 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons, I think, like most people did,
Mhm.
especially back in the early 2000s. So yeah, that's what I got started on. Started playing in campaigns. The first campaign I ever ran was actually Midnight, the FFG setting, which I started doing before I ever worked at FFG. I just um, thought the concept of like evil Lord of the Rings sounded kind of cool, and so picked it up and ran a horribly abusive and broken campaign for three of my friends.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Cool. So next, let's jump into some of the burning questions that I know most people are wanting an answer to. Um, so, what can Star Wars fans expect from Edge Studio going forward? If there's nothing currently in the works, do you plan to start any new projects in the future, or is the game dead?
The game is not dead. I'll be limited as to what I can say, except that I can say there is something in the works. Literally something that I am working on right now. Um, and by me, I mean several people. It's not just me who's working on it, but we are working on some stuff. Uh, there has been a significant transition time between between FFG and Edge. Part of that is bringing all of the existing products over to Edge so that we can do these reprints. There's also lengthy approvals processes involved, which is entirely fair. LFL has every right to want to make sure that anything with their the name and the Star Wars brand on it is up to their standards. So by the transition of shifting things from FFG to Edge, that has basically restarted a lot of that approvals process. And so that's one of the reasons it's taken so long to get some of these reprints done.
Okay. Yeah.
But that is an ongoing process that we have also been hard at work at. And we will hopefully see some of the existing products back in stock very soon, including the dice. Meanwhile, we are working on something new. Like I said, the only thing I can tell you is that it took us some time to think also to think about what the next good project would be. I'm sure you and your fans are familiar with the sheer scope of the catalog at this point, and we wanted to do something that would feel valuable to players and fans, and not just another expansion. So that's been our goal, is to try and to be very deliberate in our next moves, because it is a very mature game line.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate that. I know, like, as far as all the books that I have and all the books I've looked through, everything always feels super valuable. There's always something or a lot of great things in every book. So you kind of touched on my next two questions. We've been hearing soon regarding the dice coming back for feels like quite a few months. I heard soon back in like February from one of the people I think that we know mutually. Is there any better time frame for when we can expect it? Like later this year, next year, sooner?
I realize how frustrating that must be, and I'm in something of the same boat, because as far as print releases go, I'm not always 100% tied into the time that it takes to get this stuff reprinted and the deadlines that we're hoping to make either. We've also had issues with the Genesys and L5R dice with the same thing, and some of that early on was the transition. Some of that was also, I hate to blame the global pandemic, but there was actually some of those problems as well. And basically, it took some time for Edge to reestablish all of the links with the manufacturers who have produced those dice in the past. To get into the weeds a little bit, one of the biggest expenses with dice are the molds, especially anytime you're doing plastic injection molding. The molds are very difficult to produce, but once you have them, they can produce hundreds of thousands of dice, just boom, 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 boom. And so part of the issue with the transition was tracking down those molds and figuring out where they were so that we could continue to make the dice without having to try and cast new molds, which would be a very expensive process.
Right.
Um, that stuff's all. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So do you know if like once they come back in stock, are they probably going to be packaged the same way as before? Same amount of dice, similar in price?
That is the plan,
Okay.
and those files, especially the Genesis and the Star Wars dice files, and the L5R dice files, because they were such universal packaging to begin with. That's been one of the easier things to switch over to new printing. Um, Basically, we just because we were able to go back to the same factory for those dice. We could just switch the logos, run those through approvals, and that was pretty quick.
Mhm.
So now the particular factory that produces the dice is located in China, so shipping is a not insignificant amount of time in and of itself. But um, at this point, they are the dice are either being produced or in the queue to be produced. So my finger is crossed that it will be this year. I just can't
Yeah.
offer 100% guarantees.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. And so something else you kind of touched on. So there's a lot of people like myself who want to build their complete library of all the Star Wars and also Genesis books. Some of the Star Wars books show up on the store website as available or out of stock, but there's a good number of source books that are not listed at all. Um, so I'm assuming as part of the transition process, all the source books will be available eventually to buy. Like
That's
for example, like all the mechanics or all the pilot
sure. Like flight casual.
specializations and right.
Yeah, that is certainly the plan. Some of that is, yeah, again, to get into the weeds a little bit, some of that is outside of our control in that we, as a studio, we do not handle distribution. So we will handle print runs of material based on the orders from our distributors, both inside Asmodee and outside of Asmodee. So that's also one thing that can lead to delays in prints because if a particular distributor only orders 200, 300 copies of a book, it's simply not worth it to print them.
Mhm.
We have to then wait until other distributors come in and say, "Oh, we would also like a copy. We want this many copies, this many copies." And once we have something that is that brings economies of scale into it, then we can print everything and ship it out. Well, we don't ship it, but the factory and the distribution network ships it out.
Got it.
But we can get that rolling. So as for things not being listed on the website, that I'm afraid is something that's basically under whatever country you live in, the distribution network that handles Asmodee products. That's so like for example, if you live in the United States, you buy your book. If you buy your books online from us, you are buying them from Asmodee North America on their web store.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
mhm.
Um, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as a side note, that's also why there are no products available on our website because um, Edge Studio doesn't have any. We don't have any warehouses, and we don't have any like shipping or like any logistical
Yeah.
elements. So we can't ship anything
Yeah, that makes
unless,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of us who love these systems and we want to see the community grow for them. What is the vision that the studio has for both Star Wars and Genesis? Where do you want it to go? What steps are being taken to reach those goals? And what are your biggest hurdles?
Sure. So for Star Wars, what we want to see is sort of what I touched on before. We want to see more. We want to see the line continue, and we want to see people stay engaged in the game. But at this point, we don't want to churn out product. We want We want to be very deliberate in what we release, and we want to make sure that anything we release, people feel like, oh yeah, that is high quality stuff. That's really cool, and I look forward to putting that on my shelf.
Yep.
If that means less releases every year, then we're willing to accept that. But it doesn't mean that we'll stop producing products. As long as there is a market and an interest, we will certainly keep going. When it comes to Genesys, similar. Right now, we're actually working on some additional books, and we have a completed book that hasn't been announced yet for Twilight Imperium. So we're hoping to support the Embers of the Imperium, the book that came out this year for Genesys, and really push that that setting. Honestly, it is the biggest setting we've done with Genesys so far. Twilight Imperium has a really big following of the board game, and so we think it makes for a really good role playing setting that a lot of people will be into. And so we're going to go a bit above and beyond, supporting it with some extra stuff beyond just the single source book.
Yeah, it makes sense. So what are some of the things that the studio's doing to maybe like grow, like I guess like outside of putting out more materials, are y'all doing anything as far as to gain bigger market share in the tabletop RPG space? I know, like for example, like D&D recently has been going through some struggles because of the whole OGL thing. So that leaves a lot of people leaving a lot of room for other smaller systems to take a bigger piece of the pie. It's kind of a hard question. So
No, it's a totally reasonable question. I'll preface it by saying that I am not the head of our marketing team either, so
yeah.
I'll give you my answers, but that it may not be 100% the corporate line. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
Any case, we last year we got a new head of studio for Edge Studio, and his goal really has been that outreach and engagement is important. And I know that's an easy thing to say for sure, but this is something that he is putting some resources behind. Just this year, we got a new marketing director. Their experience was actually in the video game industry before that. So they have a lot of experience promoting games. And they have been working on a variety of campaigns and like marketing campaigns, and also working with Asmodee's larger marketing department, because there is a company-wide marketing initiative as well to promote various games that are coming out. Now, our first sort of big experiment with that was actually last year with Adventures in Rokugan. So using some of the international resources that were available. I can't say for sure what will next get those resources behind them, but any big release with a powerful brand behind it is certainly a prime candidate for it. And those kinds of marketing campaigns, I'm as far as my knowledge goes, we're talking about first of all, like various ads in a variety of spaces, both like traditional gaming spaces, and then trying things like Facebook ads or
Right.
other social media promotions, that sort of thing. The next thing is we keep supporting and trying to expand our presence at a few key conventions. So we'll be back at Gen Con, of course, this year, running demos of all of the games we produce. And you can find us around also in the event hall. We'll have some presence there as well. Meanwhile, I'm just talking about the U.S. here, but Mateo, our marketing manager, has also been hard at work at like French, Spanish exposure. That is probably the one thing about being an international studio is there's a lot of different places, like a lot of different places we have to focus our attention. So
Yeah.
sometimes, sometimes it feels like the U.S. doesn't get quite as much attention, and honestly, it's because we're also trying to grow these markets for both Genesis and Star Wars overseas, trying to do French and Spanish printings. A lot of Edge is made up of French and Spanish staff, actually. They have offices in both Toulouse and Seville. So we're trying to do translation printings of Star Wars products, bringing into the markets there, trying to encourage our partners in other European countries, um, such as Poland, Germany. I actually don't know all of them, so don't quote me on that. But a lot of Western and Central Europe.
Yeah.
Uh, and in the long run, if we can expand to other places in Asia or South America, we'll certainly try and do that as well. It's a lot of building partnerships. It's a lot of selling the idea of these products to somebody already in that country or whatever Asmodee branch is in that country. And frankly, I'm glad that I don't have to be the one responsible for it because I would not have any time to do design work.
That's totally fair. So now that Embers of the Imperium is out, has the studio? I know you said you're still supporting that. Has the studio started the process for the next Genesys Sourcebook? Um, if so, where are you at in that process, and how long does it take for a book to typically go from idea to retail?
Sure. Well, so in this particular case, the next Genesis Sourcebook is finished. We haven't announced it yet, but it's done. So it will hopefully be much less time between the release of Embers and the next book, which will be Twilight Imperium related as well. And some keen-eyed people have noticed that the name has come up in a few places, so I'll just share it here. The name of the next product is called War for the Throne,
Okay.
and I won't talk about any more about what it is, except it's a linked product to Embers of the Imperium.
Okay.
Um, so in that case, that's done. We're going through the lengthy process of getting it distributed to various partners and the various Asmodee distributors and ready to be released. So once we're a little more confident as to when it's going to come out, then we'll start talking about it.
Okay. The name sounds really cool. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'm super psyched about it. You had a second part of your question though, of like how long does this stuff normally
right,
take?
yeah.
So depending on the size of the book, it can go, it can take anywhere from a year to 2 years. Uh, the development process itself, which is really the part I'm concerned about, um, 6 to 9 months, 6 months to a year. If it's a core rulebook, something like one of the Star Wars core books, that could stretch into a year and a half. Honestly, there is a lot of writing, reviewing, art development that goes into it. But one of these setting supplements for Genesis, 9 months, give or take. However, once that's finished, there's still internal approvals. If it's a Star Wars book, there'd be external approvals. But even for a Genesis book, we need to get it approved internally through the department of Asmodee that's responsible for the intellectual properties owned by Asmodee, and that'll take some time. And then the printing process itself is very lengthy, as I sort of alluded to. It's a matter of getting orders from various distributors, distribution units in Asmodee, then sending the orders to whatever factory we have lined up. Uh, Sometimes the matter of waiting until the factory has the right paper or bandwidth in stock, which has happened to us as well. Pandemic problems.
Yeah.
Um, and then once the print run is set in and established, it'll still need to get shipped over from wherever we printed it to wherever it's being distributed. If we're talking something from China to the United States, that can be several months to get across the Pacific unloaded and so forth. And even if it's being printed in Europe, and we've done some of our printings in Europe, including Embers was actually printed in Bosnia. Um, there can still be shipping delays for all sorts of reasons. I mean, stuff as mundane as if the cargo container that we're shipping the books in isn't full with our product, it's got to wait until other studios have other products to be put into it as well. There's a whole host of
Yeah.
situations that are reasons for it, and honestly, we're always trying to learn to improve the process when it comes to all that stuff.
Cool. So what do you in the studio consider when you're deciding like which setting to do next for a Genesys Sourcebook?
There's definitely a few different things for it. One is popularity, and that's a big one. We want to be doing something that obviously people are interested in. Um, if we do a setting source book that for a setting nobody's ever heard of, then we probably won't sell as many. But another important element is how much the intellectual property is being promoted and engaged with across all of Asmodee. So, as an example, when we did Secrets of the Crucible, that was because FFG was pushing, and now to be fair, FFG, when I was in FFG, we did Secrets of the Crucible. That was, but the principle's still the same. Um, but we did Secrets of the Crucible because at the time, Keyforge was being heavily pushed as a new game for Fantasy Flight. And we figured this was the best time to do it. There were also a lot of assets we could use, such as artwork, for example. We did a lot of new art, but any large role playing book takes a lot of art, and it's no secret that sometimes you have to take existing art to help fill out the book. So existing assets were big, but also the setting itself was being heavily promoted, and we wanted to engage with that and also offer fans of Keyforge a chance to learn more about the Crucible. If if we were talking about it a couple years later, we probably wouldn't have done it. But at the time it absolutely made sense to do. Similarly, with Twilight Imperium, we did this relatively soon after the release of War for the Throne, and we were trying to coincide it with the 35th anniversary of TI. 35th, 25th anniversary of TI. Unfortunately, again, shipping delays and other issues meant that we missed it by a few months. But even so, we wanted to attach ourselves to the stuff that was going on there and other products FFG is releasing or Aconite books. So yeah, it's basically, are other people also doing stuff in that setting? Then we would be interested in doing something with that setting.
That's fair. That's cool though. I know that two board games that I think would fit a Genesys one shot or even like a Genesys campaign super well that I would love to see a source book for would be either Betrayal at House on the Hill or Nemesis. I think Betrayal's a bit old. I don't know how much of a hype that would generate, but I think Nemesis has a pretty fast growing. Are you familiar with Nemesis? It's like a alien
That was
horror.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. Oh, that's produced by. Sorry, I was looking it up. I couldn't remember
You're
who
fine.
made it. Rebel. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a very cool one.
Yeah. So the last of my questions, then I have two that I reached out to some of the viewers to see if they had any. So the last of my questions, what are the pros and cons for working under Asmodee versus when it was just Fantasy Flight?
um, no, that's a reasonable question. FFG, the when I started, I think I was the 43rd hire at Fantasy Flight. And by the time it was merged and purchased by Asmodee, I want to say there were like almost 200, maybe 150 people working at Fantasy Flight. So I think the biggest pro of working with Asmodee versus with Fantasy Flight, or when Fantasy Flight was independent versus working as part of Asmodee, because said I was part of Fantasy Flight before and after it was purchased by Asmodee. Definitely one of the pros is greater resources and that same economies of scale element. So um, part of Edge Studios formation is to, in the long run, build up a dedicated role playing studio that is producing a lot of high quality role playing games, and it can just stay focused on that. With Fantasy Flight, the company worked on we worked on a bunch of different games for a bunch of different types of games, and so resources were always stretched a little thin. You needed time from the graphic designers, you needed time from the art directors. You know, you might get things might get pushed to one side so that a different game could get finished. And there was a lot of juggling those elements. Also, Asmodee allows you to start siloing the like different distribution sides of things, publication, production, and again, it allows different elements of the company to focus on specific parts of making it a business. So it's just a less hair pull inducing way of running a company. Um, I'd say the biggest con though was honestly the thing I think I missed most about at Fantasy Flight, which was when it was a small company, there's a real sense of community. Um, I knew every other person who worked at the company, from the people in board games and card games to the people working in the warehouse. And we would hang out all the time. That was back when there was a tradition called the like $5 million dinner. Every time the company sold $5 million of product, Christian would take the whole company out to dinner somewhere. One of the first things I did as part of the company was go to a screening of the Midnight movie, which not a lot of people have seen, but that was Christian's pet project for a while, and he rented out a local theater in the south side of Minneapolis, and everyone at the company dressed up, and like made an event out of it to go see this movie screening. Yeah, it was much more close knit, and it was really awesome to like. I made a lot of lifelong friends in that time, and but that's the trade off to having a company that runs more smoothly. Generally, is
Yeah.
oh yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah. So I messaged out to some of the viewers earlier today, and I'm picking two questions that they asked. A lot of them were questions that I already have asked, like when's the next Star Wars thing coming out. But I picked my two favorite that weren't already included. The first one was, has have you ever given any thought into doing something like a High Republic era source book?
Without being too specific, we have thought about a number of different settings. The High Republic is on our radar. So are all the other setting time periods that are really interesting, and LFL's doing some really cool stuff with right now. So um, Mandalorian, obviously, Andor, although Andor's kind of in our existing time period, maybe a little sooner. But all this stuff is super compelling, and it's very interesting for us. In the end, it comes down to what we think has enough material there that we can make a role-playing game about it. We also don't ever want to step on LFL's toes. So we don't want to create a situation such as the old expanded universe where it got a little weird. If you're I mean, I read a lot of the expanded universe books when I was younger, and hell, I still read my favorites. But some of that got real weird, and last thing we want to do is create something that later LFO is going to be like, nah, that's not a thing.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was talking to Keith, he was saying that I asked him about how much research has to go into writing a Star Wars book, because he like stepping on canon or what's not canon, or like how much new stuff can you create. And he was saying that LFL is like, what you make is like that's for real. So like you just gotta, yeah, it makes it a little bit tricky.
Yeah, they take it very seriously, which is a privilege and also a responsibility. So
So the second question is: have there been any plans to change Star Wars RPG's vehicle and ship combat to match Genesys? I've seen a lot of comments, especially on my ship combat video, that says that they just homebrew in Genesys, because not a lot of people like the Star Wars RPG ship combat. So
that's a good question, and I'll have to be quiet here and say I still have to wait and see.
that's fair. Cool. Well, that is it from me. I really appreciate you coming and sitting and talking. It's been a lot of fun. I know a lot of people are going to be happy with some of these answers, and the rest of them were super interesting to kind of get a behind the scenes look at what you do. Do you have anything you'd like to plug? There's always Embers of the Imperium, but I don't know if there's something else you'd like to plug.
I mean, I'd plug Embers of the Imperium twice because, to be honest, is when I started Genesys, that was always the setting supplement that I said, it was like, if I can do just one supplement and then I had to leave the game industry forever, that one. Because TI was, that was one of my first board game purchases ever back at a time in my life when saving up $100 was a big deal. I mean, it's a lot more now, but and it was a very lengthy game process to get it done. There were a lot of twists and turns in the development process, but it also meant that I got to spend a lot of time working on it, and I worked with an amazing team of people. And frankly, I think it turned out to be the best setting supplement we've done for Genesys. So, absolutely would plug that. I would also say that Midnight, if you are somebody who prefers a D20 system, I'm actually really pleased with what we did with Midnight this time around. We cleaned it up a little bit from some of the weirder, or we made it I think a better setting, a more compelling setting, and a lot simpler to use mechanically, and to the point where one of the games that I run now is a monthly Midnight game.
So what is Midnight for anybody who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, that's a good point. I shouldn't. So Midnight is a alternative fantasy setting. which can basically be described as Lord of the Rings, but Sauron wins. Not actually Lord of the Rings related, of course, but in this setting, there is a dark god called Isrador, or the Shadow, who has, for thousands of years, plagued the lands of humans and elves and dwarves. And about 100 years ago, he sent his legions of orcs down from the north, and this time everything fell apart. So, for the past century, the lands of humans have been occupied by orc legions and the Shadows' armies in general, and the elves and the dwarves are slowly being besieged and snuffed out bit by bit. So, it takes the whole heroic fantasy genre and kind of flips it on its head because, for example, money is worthless in this setting. No, like, people will trade for stuff, but if you come to somebody and say, "Hey, I got some gold," they're like, "Cool, do you have any wheat? Because I'm literally starving to death here." And also, like, magic powers are illegal in this setting, so they have specialized people to go out and hunt down magic users. So you get yourself a magic sword, suddenly you've just painted a target on your back. And the final thing that's interesting about it is, for those of you who are D&D players, divine magic is specifically limited to the bad guys because there's only one god in the setting, and it's Isrador. All the other gods have been basically cut off from the world. So if you play a cleric, you are an evil cleric, 100%. So you can't be a divine magic, or, well, with the exception of paladins, but that's a whole different thing I won't go into. So yeah, it's just, it's a really cool setting. It's a really cool twist on things, and it was really fun to go back to something that I had first, was like my first foray into GMing, like almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
So just very, very satisfying to do it. And I think we made a really cool book out of it.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. So I'm going to put a link down to Midnight down in the description below. I'm going to have 2 links to Embers Imperium down below. Go check them out. Go purchase them. I need to play. I want the Embers of the Imperium, but I want to play Twilight Imperium first. So it's very high on my list of board games to get next. I have a whole stack of like board games behind my green screen. So I look forward to getting more into that. I really want to get those books. I'm also very new to Genesys myself. I've played it like once or twice. I have the books. Finding people to play it with is kind of hard sometimes.
Of course.
So cool. Well, once again, thank you so much. Thanks to all the Patreons for supporting. You guys are the reason why I'm able to do what I do. And I will see you guys in the next video. But until then, see ya. Force be with you.